Hi, Joshua.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Take my glasses off so we can.
Do you have, yeah, one second. Do you have any documents to share, or do you, I'm just gonna let you share your screen?
Oh, cool. Yeah, I have a PowerPoint.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna.
Oh, sweet. Oh, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Oh, I just let you do it.
Oh, sweet. Oh, thank you. I think this is it. Oh. Oh, do you see visions for an inclusive and
Yep.
welcome? Oh,
You
sweet.
see it.
I did it. Sweet. Okay.
So do you need, and did you want to have any breakouts or anything? And if you need anything from me, just chat me.
Well, I think I'm good for now.
Okay.
This is a program that I adapted from something I created this past semester in school. In an original iteration, I had breakout groups, but I think that it might just be easier to.
Okay. Just let me know. I'm on the controls.
Sweet. Thank you.
We have a few more minutes, so I'll be right back.
Cool.
Hi, folks. We're going to start in 1 more minute. Hi, everyone. Josh, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Oh, thanks, Rudy. Let me just put some information in the chat. So my name is Josh Gischner. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am currently a student at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where I'm studying to be a rabbi and a Jewish educator. And I'm so excited to be with you all tonight. I'm going through the chat and seeing a bunch of smiling faces. So what we are going to do tonight is we're going to be exploring the story of Abraham and Sarah with their tent when they welcomed 3 desert wanderers in. And we're going to use that as a model to how we can create more inclusive and vibrant and welcoming Jewish communities and Jewish spaces as we work together as B'nai Israel. In the chat, I just put my contact information and also the schedule for this evening, for this shiur. We're going to begin with this introduction and welcome, and then we're going to move to a text study on seeing Abraham and ourselves as a model welcomer. Then we're going to move to a case study on welcome with Pam Schuler, who is a person who is a really incredible mensch and a person in my life. And then we're going to finish up with an activity where we're going to work together to collaborate on a document to create a more inclusive Jewish future together. So let's begin with a framing question. Oh, this is our schedule. Framing question. Think about a time when someone you loved or when you felt welcomed or not welcomed in a Jewish space. Think about a time when you or one of your loved ones felt welcomed or not so welcomed or included in a Jewish space. I'm going to use that as a framing question for our text. So we're going to begin in Genesis 18, verses 1 through 8. And just some context on the chapter. This is the beginning of Parshat Ve'era, when Abraham is in the hot desert and he sees these 3 desert wanderers and welcomes them into his tent. The chapter before this is basically when Abraham gets circumcised. So a lot of the rabbinic commentators like to frame this text through, well, this guy just had a circumcision, and then boom, this happens. For other context, towards the middle of this chapter, this is the Annunciation scene of Sarah. So this is when Sarah learns that she is going to be a mother at like 90 years old. So keep that in the back of your mind as you are reading this text with me. So what we're going to do is we are going to begin. So there are 3 different parts in this text. There's a narrator, which I'm going to read. The blue text, the text of Abraham, my partner is going to read, and my father actually volunteered to read the text, the green text of the three wanderers. And I think it's nice to get some extra voices in here. So we're going to begin with the first two verses. And we're going to do a nice slow read because I think there's just so much juicy Torah in here. So it begins, let me just move this so I can see. Vayar elav Adonai ba'alonei Mamre, and Adonai appeared to him, to Abraham, by the tabrans of Mamre. These are the big trees of Mamre, which is located in the south of the West Bank. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw three men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran to the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, we'll get there. So think about if you were a director or producer of a show, a Broadway show, a theatrical production of some sort. Think about who you're casting. So we know we're casting Abraham. We're casting three desert wanderers. And also probably God's voice is going to be in there. And the setting is in the south of the West Bank, which is, I don't know how many miles away from Jerusalem, but by these large, big trees. And this is kind of the setting. So now thinking about in the chat, if you could respond to this. If you were a director directing Abraham, directing an actor playing Abraham in these two verses, what might you ask your actor to portray? What sort of things would you, thinking about his age, he's pretty old at this point, thinking about how hot it is, how would you direct him? For me, so something that I think about is his old age. I think about what it might look like to be out of breath. It's so hot. And also thinking about the fact that he just circumcised himself. He might be in pain. He's looking up and he's seeing these men, but he's in pain and it's hot. And he's going to greet these three men. Something I think about, and I'd like to get what you have to think about this, is these verbs. There's a succession of verbs that don't normally happen in biblical texts like this. He looks up, he sees the three men, as soon as he saw them, the repetition of the verb lirot, vayera, which is vayar, which is the same root as the Torah portion. And he runs to the entrance and then greets them and he bows to the ground. Ooh, Rudy says, I think of him sitting in the heat of the desert day. Yeah, and it's hot, he's running, and he's an old dude. I'm curious, when you think about Abraham's character, what is his character like? If you had to think, if you were his rabbi, if you were his rebbe, and you were trying to analyze, what is this dude like? Yeah, he's surprised. If he's running to these people who he's never met before. I like to think that he takes initiative and he's caring about these other people. Let's jump to verse 3. Abraham is a kind person who takes care of others. In verse 3 through 5, so he said,
My lords, if it pleases you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way.
They replied,
Do as you have said.
So there are lots of ways that Abraham says that he will help the wanderers. He says that to give them water, to make sure their feet are bathed, to recline, help them recline under the trees, to give them bread, to refresh themselves. But something that's interesting here is how he frames those suggestions. How does he frame them? If you, like, thinking about back if you were a director, how would you ask your actor to frame them? If somebody wants to jump in their audio. Zach says that his character is a humanitarian who puts others' needs ahead of himself because it's the right thing to do. So it's like he's asking permission. So, my lords, if it pleases you, don't go past your servant. Let a little water be brought, we'll bathe your feet and recline you under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread. He's like asking permission. And then as soon as the three men say, came to Aseka Asher Dibarta, do as you have said, that's when they became his guests officially. So he frames this through this, like, he basically the men consent, which is interesting. My next question is, which when I think of this text, how do you think that the wanderers felt listening to this request? Imagine you've been out in the desert, it's exhausting, and then this old dude is in front of his tent and he said, hey, come in, I'm gonna give you this bread, I'm gonna give you this place to sleep by this huge, beautiful tree that are not currently in Israel and Palestine anymore, actually I've never been to that area, but they're not, it's a different topiary, different forested system. So like, think about like, how do you think they felt? Or how would you feel if you were hot and exhausted and you were offered all of these things? Rachel says, I'm struck by how Abraham positions himself as a subservient to his new guests, and he's a servant, not a master in his own home. And that must have been flattering. They must have just loved it. I mean, if I was them, relieved and welcome. Now let's shift to my favorite part of this, which is when things get interesting. So they say, so that the three wanderers came to Aseka Asher Dibarta, do as you have said, and there. So then Abraham hastened into the tent of Sarah and said,
Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes.
Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate. Now there's some issues with gender. We have a new character, the servant boy, who we're not necessarily sure in verse 8 who is actually who is taking the curds and milk, and who is waiting on the three wanderers under the tree. Maybe the servant boy is waiting on Abraham and everyone. I'm not sure, but we definitely, the verbs change here. It goes, Abraham hastened, then he runs to the herd. It matches the stuff in the beginning. Bob said, I would be both very pleased, but in a bit of my brain, I would be wondering, am I going to be obligated to do something for him before I leave? Yeah. So going back, you'd feel pleased, and but also like a little, maybe do I have to give him something? Give this old dude something. So the desert wanderers are in the house, and they're being waited on right here in verses 6 through 8. And something interesting happens. He says to Sarah, quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make the cakes. Something that I'm interested in is, how does he talk to Sarah as compared to how he spoke to the 3 wanderers? Go back to the 3 wanderers, it was, if it pleases you, let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, recline, and then they consent. And they say, yeah, sure. But what's different with Sarah? Yeah, exactly. Bob says he does not ask Sarah, he tells Sarah. Sarah doesn't have a chance to consent to this help. She has no voice. And actually in an original draft of this lesson, this was a little longer and we actually went into more of Sarah, which I please do because it's wonderful. Lots of Torah. But Sarah, she only speaks for the first time in chapter 18 in verse 12. And she says, and that's when she's laughing. And she learns that Isaac is going to be, or that she's going to have a baby boy. So Sarah doesn't consent, but the wanderers do. And Sarah is ordered. She's told what to do. So something that's interesting to me is this juxtaposition between these verses here and these verses. My curiosity here is, what does this mean about Abraham's character? He's so willing to help the wanderers, but he forgets about Sarah. He just does not treat her well. And we see this so quickly in the text. What does this say about how Abraham Bob says, he does not explain to Sarah that 3 people have come by. They've lived together. Yeah. They have lived together for so long that she will implicitly know why he was excited. So Abraham may have been, he was like swept up in the moment. Maybe Sarah knew. But on the other side is, there's so much in the text that we just don't know. We don't know intention of characters. The biblical author didn't really do that, which is something we do today in our own writing. But something for me, what's meaningful here is forgetting about the xenophobia and how not xenophobia, the sense of the patriarchy over this text. I see Abraham as a human being. Ooh, and Michaela, who is awesome, she just said, he assumes that she's basically an extension of him and not her own person. He makes a mistake. He makes or in my reading on it, I think he makes an oops. He just doesn't live up to what I would expect, what I would want somebody to do when they're welcoming someone. And for me, this just frames Abraham as a human being. He's somebody who does so well and then messes up. Especially from our contemporary progressive Jewish context. Now I'd like to just transition into the next part of this session, where we're going to focus, instead of on the text, we're going to focus on a portion which is going to help us apply the text to where we are today. So this is a quote from April Baskin, and she writes, for me, and she's very much a contemporary writer, that's a picture of her. Unlike the biblical author. So she writes, for me, the audacious element of audacious hospitality is the insistence that we do have the capacity to be courageous enough to take risks, to be more inclusive and intentional about our diversity, while also not forsaking nor watering down the richness and depth that Judaism offers. And I leave this as a gift for all of us as we move into learning a little bit more from Pam Schuler. This is also, in a few moments, I'm going to actually send you all a copy of a lot of different sources as a part of our activity. And I included this quote. And Bob says, I think that this was not an every week or an every month experience to have strangers pass by. Exactly. Otherwise, they would have had some extra food around. Since this is rare, they immediately decide to throw a feast on the spot. And it's very Jewish, too. So we do not expect hungry normally employed neighbors until last month, and we have to immediately step up and make sure they are not going to go hungry. Yeah, exactly. It's very Jewish to be hospitable. But on the flip side, like it's hard. And I think that shows in our biblical text in Genesis 18. And now transitioning, this is, so Pam Schuler was my NICD advisor many moons ago in high school. And she is a wonderful human being. I really look up to her because I also have Tourette Syndrome. Pam is a comedian, a speaker, an advocate, an overall mensch. She doesn't say it on her website, but I consider her an expert in inclusion. And she's just a really special person to me and inspires me in the same way she uses her Tourette's to make the world a brighter place. It's something that inspires me as well. So Pam, what else did I write about Pam? Oh, we're not going to have time to watch her entire Ellie Talk, and Ellie Talk is kind of like a TED Talk, but for Jews. But please watch it if you have a chance. And it will also be included in the video, in the extra things that I'll send in a few minutes. But anyway, so Pam, and you can visit her website at pamelacomedy.com. And she's a stand-up comedian, which makes her even cooler. But anyway, so this is a quote about a very dark moment in her life that I think we could all learn from. Pam writes, "That year in 8th grade, my Tourette's was so bad that I was kicked out of my congregation. I was asked to leave a space, but it felt more profound than that. It felt like I was being told that Judaism was not for me. When my dad died, the Jewish community rallied around my family. But when my Tourette's got so bad that I was hard to communicate with, depressed, and disruptive, the Jewish community had no idea how to respond. So they didn't." I think taking a step back for a moment, Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder. It causes involuntary tics and motor impulses. It causes, for me, sensory issues. There's lots and lots and lots of comorbids, like a lot of us have OCD, ADHD, all sorts of learning disabilities and anger issues for some people. And there's something called coprolalia, which is when people will say words that they don't mean. It's a tic. And sometimes, or vocal tics, and sometimes some of them are bad words, different curse words. Tourette's is something that none of us could help. And a lot of people don't really understand how challenging it is to be a person with Tourette's, especially within the Jewish community. So to watch Pam react in her video about how she was kicked out of her synagogue is just heartbreaking. I'd like to just look at part of her Ellie Talk, where she speaks about a moment where somebody understood how to include her. And this was, I think, a foundational moment in her being an educator and an advocate. So let me jump. It is 4:28. Here we go. Ooh.
In 9th grade, I had the opportunity to go away to this incredible boarding school. It wasn't a school for kids with disabilities. It was more a place that celebrated individuality and creativity. It pushed students to be their best selves and outside of our comfort zones. I remember being in 9th grade math class. And up until this point, I'd been so accustomed to being asked to leave a room when my Tourette's became disruptive and allowed to return when it was under control. And as I was sitting in math class that day, I started making almost a metronome type sound. And my math teacher said, "Pam," and I got up to leave, as I had so many times in the past. And instead he said, "Pam sounds like a metronome. Let's write a song about math." And we did. We wrote an entire CD about math, with me sounding like a welcomed accompaniment in the background. In that classroom, in that moment, inclusion took a turn in my head. It no longer felt like what the community couldn't do because I was a part of it, and started feeling like what the community got to do because I was a part of it, because they were learning and growing with every member. Inclusion is creativity.
Inclusion is creativity. Inclusion is creativity. That's just, I'm getting chills thinking about it, because it really is. it's making sure, I mean, as an example, I carry these a lot with me when I work with children. Fidgets. Look up fidgets. They're one of the best things in the world. But anyway, Pam eventually did make it back to her Judaism. She made it back through camp, not through the synagogue. Because at camp they were inclusive and welcoming and warm. And there's a beautifully hysterical story, because she's a comedian, that she includes. And when you have a chance to watch this entire video, which will be linked in the materials that I'll send in a few moments, please watch it, the whole thing. She's just a wonderful human being. Thinking about Abraham, thinking about Pam's story, thinking about Genesis 18, think about a Jewish community close to your heart. In what ways are leaders being creative about how they mindfully welcome and include? And now that we're in the coronavirus pandemic, think about Zoom communities, think about summer camp, think about synagogue, think about that one time you were in the rabbi's office. If you'd like to share things in the chat, or if you'd like to open your mic up, or not, that's not how it works. You turn on your mic, you don't open it up. It's a little late. Shavuot, it's a little sleepy time. One example from my own life, I was one of the first counselors at SciTech, which is the URJ's science and technology camp, where we actually hire inclusion counselors. And that's what their title is, but that's their secret title. The kids know them as unit counselors. They are a person who has extensive training because they're studying to be special educators, they're studying in school for all sorts of things. They're usually college students, but it's their job to basically just hang out with all of the kids and love them all as much as possible, but they have a background in helping to include them. So that's just one of the more beautiful examples of inclusion in the Jewish community. And as we're continuing to think, and if you'd like to include other ways in the chat, you totally could. But we're actually just going to transition, share my screen so I can see everyone's faces again. Oop, I didn't unshare my screen. Now I unshared my screen. What we're going to do is I just put a document in our chat. Hopefully you're on a laptop or a device that can look at documents. If you can open that up, it's a Google Doc. And on that first page is an activity for us to all do a little bit. I see an anonymous narwhal, an anonymous pumpkin. So what we're gonna do is start filling out this chart, which is, I have a whole bunch of places on the left that we will all find ourselves in, more or less, a lot of these places. And on the right, insert ways that you can make this space more inclusive. Think intersectionally, think about the LGBTQ community, think about Jews of color, interfaith families, think about Jews with disabilities who think differently, act differently, who look differently. Think about the paintings on the wall, think about the books in the libraries. Get creative too. How can we make our world, our Jewish world, more inclusive and more loving for every single one of us, especially our kids? And I'll include some on my own too. And we're going to do this activity for about 5 minutes or until we're done. But hopefully we'll never be done. So as people are finishing up for now, this is that inclusion is an ongoing process and an ongoing thing that we should be doing as much as possible and thinking about while people are continuing to fill in. I just kind of wanted to walk you through what's in the rest of this document. So the next page is the same source sheet that we worked through before, which has the color-coded text. And then following that there's some wisdom on welcoming and inclusion. Some of my favorite quotes, a couple, actually I think they're all from Jews with the exception of Jewish professionals and actually mostly rabbis, with the exception of Mr. Rogers and Olaf from Frozen. But they're all really good quotes to think about when we're thinking about loving and including people. And after that, this is originally designed for one of my classes. So there's another text study that if you'd like to work on with a friend, which brings some more sources into this conversation, including, I think my favorite source on inclusion, or on welcoming in general, where it's from the Talmud, from Masechet Shabbat. Basically, which teaches that it's Rav Yehuda said that Rabbi Hanassi said that hospitality is greater than greeting guests is greater than bringing in the divine presence, the Shekhinah, the feminine God presence that we have, which is one of my favorites. So it's a lot of fun stuff there, and I hope that as you're looking at those other sources, that you can continue to add to this list and use this list when you're thinking about your own leadership in the Jewish community. I think we're all leaders in the Jewish community, especially when it comes to making everyone feel warm and included. What I'd like to do now is please continue to add things if you'd like. Let me just reshare my screen again. I have one more question for all of us. Here we go. So where do we go from here? So looking ahead, we have a lot of work to do. We tend to think that a lot of things are fixed. But when for instance, I'm a student at HUC studying to be a Reform rabbi, only 2 years ago, or last year, 2 years ago, if you walked across our top floor where all of our classrooms are, all you would see were pictures of old white men. That's not the case anymore because we kind of revolted. But there's so much work that we need to do in making our people feel included and loved and cared for. So if you'd like to bring any of your own wisdom in addition, or maybe if you'd like to share what you wrote on our Google spreadsheet, our Google Doc, or if you have any questions, now is the time for questions or comments, or to bring your own wisdom on inclusion, and how can we do better? Let me see the chat. You can either say something in the chat, or you can include your voice. I think my brother has something to say something.
I'm still mulling it over.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to, Josh, I want to say, first, thank you, because it's not like I haven't thought about inclusion. I did a lot of creating welcoming environments for LGBT kids and kids with LGBT parents, and worked on that issue in my kids' schools and at their summer camps and such. It's not something I haven't thought about, but I hadn't thought about it from this perspective, and with a lens, a lens of Torah. And I really appreciate your teaching here tonight. And I think that this is where do we go from here? We like these conversations, and where we think about the very real ways, because I think we're all, many of us, most of us, I want to believe that most of us are really well intentioned, but yet we all see from our viewpoint and our perspective, and to constantly be reminded, and not just reminded, but open, having our eyes open to additional situations and conditions, and ways in which, the ways in which I'm not excluded, but another person might be, is a constant learning experience, and a constant growth experience. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Oh, Zach.
All right, so I think that as a Jewish community, as a Kahila Kadosha, a holy community, we should strive to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, and that no one should be afraid to come forward and say, hey, I'm having this issue in services or Zoom services, or I think that the building could use pictures from this specific demographic. I think that we should make it so no one's afraid to do that, where they think that they will be invalidated, because everyone's voice and everyone's opinion at the end of the day is just incredibly valid.
Yeah, I mean, something that I'm as easy as making sure that on your synagogue website, or on whatever organization website, that you have a picture of if you're a rabbi, I'm thinking about this as I'm about to be ordained next year, on your website, having a picture of you standing under the chuppah with two men, and what message that sends. Or in your synagogue, making sure that you have pictures of Jews of color up on the wall, because that's just not the case. Or women studying Torah. It's a thing that we can all strive to build on, and make communities and spaces that are just warm and cozy for everyone, and accepting and loving. I do have a question for everyone. I tried an experiment in this session. I'm thinking about how I'm constantly learning, and I did try an experiment in this session that I've never done before. Did anyone catch the hidden Mickey? Okay. Just curious. There's a thing in Disney people like to hide Mickeys in places, and I was just curious if anyone saw that I did in fact hide a Mickey right here.
Oh.
Wanted to see if anyone caught it. I think maybe next time, maybe I'll introduce that in the beginning of the session, just as like something fun to watch for.
Okay, like I'm not a very learned, person, although I love this conversation. I thought that was like some like new, I don't know, thing that for trope or something. I was like, what is that? I wanted to just add something to tack onto something that Zach just said, that I think I think you're right. It would be great to create environments like that, but I also want to I also hope that we can create a space like that where those comments are, and I think this is what Zach was trying to say, that those comments are not seen as criticism or critical, that it's, people are open to hearing it, and then they don't get defensive. That's what I would love to see. If we can raise these as comments, and I love what you said about just creativity, just being creative, and that people see it in that vein instead of thinking that you're just being critical of the way they're doing things. So thanks, thank you. Really, I joined late and I'm sorry, but it was really, really good. Thank you.
Amen, amen. Oh, and I'm sorry, I don't see your name. It's not popping up. Actually, let me shut off this, then I can see everyone's names. Oh, Rebecca.
Yeah, okay, so thank you. I think that this is a very thoughtful thing to do, to have thinking about how do you make the environment inclusive. There are a lot of little things there. People are a lot more than their specific special needs as the standard diversity categories would define them. So, for example, I'm a woman, someone else might be a woman. We might be reacting in very different ways to being a woman. I am gender nonconforming. And so that is one of my reactions to being a woman. And that's an example. And part of it as well is the inspiration factor. What gets people coming back? Inspiring. I do a lot of online activism about Israel and Jewish issues. And so figuring out how to get people inspired, get them engaged, is it's not just accommodating the standard diversity categories, it's also accommodating them personally.
Yeah, there's just so much in there when I think about how we can include the language of inclusion. Like when I say that, I mean loving people, and I think that's what we can strive to do. And on Shavuot, which is I think really just a holiday about learning and love and learning how to love even more. That's really Jewish tradition in a nutshell. But also at the same time to remember we're all a little like Abraham. We mess up a little bit sometimes, but usually we have the best intentions.
Yeah.
And with that, I wanted to wish you all a Chag Sameach. And if you'd like, please keep adding to this document and keep growing. And also that's a metaphor too. Keep adding to your own knowledge and how we can make everyone feel loved and welcomed and included. Chag Sameach.
Gosh, thank you so much. Chag Sameach, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and hope
Thank you, Rudy.
turn into more G Street activities. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Laila Tov.
Thank you.